Hello, and welcome back to Book Talk, where today I get to have a conversation with my friend Roseanna White. And I'm so excited because we are talking about her new book, A Noble Scheme. First off, I love the dress on the cover.
Right?
And I, Bethany always does this. I
They
want
do.
the dress.
I know. I've
Like,
asked them repeatedly, can you just like pass those along to the author? And they're like, ha ha, you're so funny. No, I'm serious.
I know. I will, because the one on the first cover, and I didn't bring that one in today. I should have, but it was a stunning purple. I know you've got it over there, don't you?
Right here. Yeah.
Yes, 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 yes. Because that one is just that beautiful disguise cover is stunning with the purple. And this series is just so much fun. The Imposters, and I adored the first book. In fact, I will probably give away a copy of the first book because I have an extra. There's another one of those where I bought myself several copies because I forgot I kept pre-ordering them.
Done that.
Have you
Yep.
ever done that?
Oh,
You
yeah.
know,
It's like, oh, look, someone gets a gift.
exactly, because I had so much fun pre-ordering them. I forgot I pre-ordered more than one. And so I loved the idea for this series because it's Gilded Age slash Edwardian because it's set in England.
Mhm.
And it's this idea of you've got this lord and lady who in their father dies, leaves them basically penniless because he forgot to stop having a good time and actually pay the bills. And so they're doing everything they can to keep their estate going. But they're trained as like circus folks.
Yep.
How did you
Yep.
come up with this idea?
I don't know where that part came from. I basically decided, okay, I knew I wanted to have an aristocratic brother and sister who had a private investigation firm. And then so I like hats. I don't wear them, but I like them. So I have a stack of costume hats. So I have my Edwardian one with the big feather, and I have my 1920s cloche, and I have, a fedora, and I have all these just sitting piled up. And one night I looked over at them and I was just musing on how, we have the idiom about wearing lots of hats. It was like, and in the world of costuming, a hat really does change your persona. Like if I put on that Edwardian hat, I'm an Edwardian lady. If I put on the 1920s hat, I'm a 1920s lady. And then I started thinking, well, what if there was, these women had these huge collections of hats in the aristocracy. And I was imagining this girl who is pretty average looking, and you know how things can overshadow you? I'm like, but what if she
Yeah.
used that? So what if she designs all these costumes to portray whatever she wants to be, knowing that they're going to eclipse who she is, so that all you see is the costume? And I was like, well, where would she learn to do that? Clearly theater people taught her how to do costuming. And you know who else had a lot of great costuming was the circus. And so that's where this all came from. And I was like, and clearly their father wasted all their money on these entertainers and entertainments. So I figured it's just fair that they have to earn some money back using the skills they picked up.
Well, and Marigold and Yates are just the best characters. And it's so funny because there's so much over the top because of the costuming, and they're tumbling and they're flying through the air on these acrobatic skills, and the flying trapeze and all this, which is so ridiculously over the top. And yet on the ground they're so not over the top. They're just these people you want to get to know. And
Yep.
so the idea that you're just looking at hats and going, well, what if? And of course. And I'm like, yeah, that's such an author thing to do.
It's just
And
bits and pieces, right? We just pull them all together.
and then we just weave this braid and go
Yep.
to a
Ta-da!
3 book series called The Imposters.
Yes.
So you have that with the very first one being A Beautiful Disguise. But the book that's coming out is book two, A
Mhm.
Noble Scheme. Gemma and Graham, be still my heart. So A Beautiful Disguise is kind of a farce.
Mhm.
This is not.
No, no.
What were you doing to these two poor people?
Well, okay. So when I wrote A Beautiful Disguise, I knew that Gemma and Graham had some history behind them, and I had no idea what it was. So,
I have
um,
done that before too.
right. And it was like, I don't know. So I knew what I wanted half of the big twist to be. Because that part actually, it was one of the pieces that inspired the whole series that I actually had in a dream, which this is the only time I can ever say that. But I had a dream that I woke up from, and I knew that it was set in Edwardian times, that there was a PI firm, that there was a brother and sister involved, and that there was this other twist that we learn in book two. So I'm not going to tell you what it is. And that's what I knew, and that was it. And so then I pulled that together with the hat thing and everything. And I was like, okay, we're just going to make this the imposters, which the name was also in the dream. I knew it was the imposters. So when it came time to actually write it, I realized that this particular part of the dream was about Gemma and Graham, but that they weren't book one. They were going to be book two. So I set it up as best as I knew how at the time. And then, I turned in that manuscript, and it was time to start writing book two. And I was like, I guess I need to figure out what's going on with them now. No clue. I had no clue.
But you
So
have a deadline, and so you
yeah,
have to figure it
right,
out.
right. So I was on vacation. We like to vacation at the beach, the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and walking on the beach is like happy place, like creative genius place. So we're walking, and I'm talking to my husband. I'm like, okay, so here's what I know. I know this, and I know this, and I know this. Go! And so we just kind of brainstormed and spitballed until David's like, really, it just has to be this. And I'm like, yeah, you're really right. It does. It has to be that. So again, I'm not going to tell you what it all is.
Yeah.
But I knew that the job that they're on had to have something to do with children, because I needed something to break Gemma out of her shell. She's very closed off right now.
Mhm.
And you can't deny helping a kid at Christmas, right? Like, you just can't. You'd be heartless. So she's kind of dragged into this investigation against her will, because she has to help rescue this kidnapped boy, and that makes her put up with Graham for a couple weeks, and then we get all of the explanation in between there. But yeah, so a very, very different take on it. And
Yeah.
they're using more the theater skills that they've learned rather than the acrobatic skills. Gemma and Graham are not the acrobats in the
Yeah.
organization, but they've all been trained as actors. And Graham is an architect, so he has the skills to like tell what's really in a building, especially these ancient old manor houses. They're built on top of things. There's so much history in England that you can literally just dig up. And I was
Yeah.
like, okay, we're gonna run with that and see what Graham discovers for us. So
And that's what has been really fun about the book, is seeing some of that and watching the uniqueness that they each bring to it. Because Yates and Marigold, and even Merritt in the first book, are bringing their unique skill sets, and
mhm.
they're still showing up. And it's really fun to have them be back in it, and hanging off the sides of buildings, and doing all their
We have to have
crazy
that.
because that's what everybody does in Edwardian England.
Right.
But to then see, in a sense, the reminders that we're all wired differently, and we have different skill sets and different ways that God has gifted each of us, and to see that coming out so clearly with Graham and with Gemma, and the way it's kind of embedded from an early age. And
Mhm.
so it's been fun to read that, and just to have that reminder. So if there was a theme to this book, what would that be?
The theme is again pretty heavy. It's about confronting the things that hurt us most. So this book deals with grief, with dealing with grief, and a lot of just those things that we have to face within ourselves that we usually shy away from because they hurt. And so
Mhm.
often, especially some of us with certain dispositions, would rather shove things into a box and pretend they don't exist than actually grapple with them and deal with them and lean into them. But ultimately, that's not healthy. And
Yeah.
it changes who we are. And that's something that Gemma especially deals with, is that because she has made a decision to ignore the past and try not to be harmed by it, it harms her more. And the idea of, what is our identity? Are we wrapped up in our relationships with others? Is that how we define ourselves? Who are we when we strip those things away? And, how do we reconcile our own grief and our loss with a God who is loving? Because sometimes he doesn't seem loving.
Mhm.
And a lot of this was actually inspired by a book I edited, called Grief Exposed, which is a nonfiction book. And it's about one man chronicling his grief after losing an adult child. but it's 10 years worth of journaling through his grief.
Mhm.
And one of the things that just hit me most strongly in that book was that society today, especially Christian society, has this idea that you're not allowed to grieve because your loved one is with Christ. So grieving is doubting. And that's not
Yeah.
true. and
Yeah.
and so, through his journaling, he really grapples with the idea that it's okay to be sad and it's okay to be broken, and it's through who you become through that matters. And so as I was editing that, it's just something that stuck with me that I wanted to explore through my own characters of, when we do face loss, whatever that kind of loss may be, how are we becoming who God wants us to be through that grief? And it was something that hit me very hard too, because I have a child who was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and he went into DKA, which is when, you're all but in a coma in the hospital, and it was scary.
Yeah.
And for years, I had a lot of trauma from that, where nightmares and just this fear of losing this child I love so much and dealing with it day in and day out. And, it's an illness. But it's one that lasts a lifetime, right? So
Yeah.
you never get past it. It's always a part of your life. And that's something I've been exploring in different ways through different books I've written. But in this one, I just had to face the fact that, even when it's something that doesn't result in the ultimate loss, we lose parts of ourselves. So you lose that ease of just being able to take your kid out for ice cream, right? Without thinking about it. You always have to think about it now. And I know other people with chronic illness, they have to think about it every day, and you grieve the loss of that easy life. And so grief has so many different aspects in our
Yeah.
lives, and it sounds like a horrible, sad thing to talk about, but in reality, it's something we all face. Like, one guarantee in life, right? We're all going to lose somebody. Um, or we're all going to lose part of ourselves, or we're all going to lose a dream. And whatever that is, ignoring it is not the answer. We have to learn to accept the path God puts us on and find who we are through it. And, Yates and Marigold have their way of doing it by embracing this wacky plan of theirs. And Graham and Jem are a little different. So they have to grapple with things in different ways.
I love that. And I love what you were talking about a minute ago about how, the church just doesn't even grapple with it. There's this idea, I call it almost like plastic Christianity, that, we're not real with each other anymore. It's this idea of, how are you? Oh, I'm fine. No, you're
Mhm.
not. No, you're not. But we don't, nobody's safe anymore because everybody feels like they have to be fine and they have to be perfect. And that's not real. And that's not honest. And that's not what's really happening and what's really going on. And so I actually love the idea that you're exploring some of these deeper themes and issues in reality, because sometimes it's in fiction that we can confront
Mhm.
those harder things and actually start to go, wait a minute. Because I know in one of those seasons of loss and challenge for me, one of the things that made me feel most isolated was the fact that my church stopped being a safe place. And the fact that I felt like nobody actually saw me and nobody cared enough to really push past and wanting to see that, actually, no, I was cracking apart,
Yeah.
but everybody just wanted to see that, oh, Kara's fine. Kara's always fine. I'm like, no, actually, I'm literally cracking apart in front of you, and nobody's taking the time to see that. And I'm not even pretending I'm fine. And so, we've got to get past that to
Yeah.
back to realness. And one of my favorite sayings right now is, God is good, but life can suck. And we have to be
Right.
able to reconcile those two things and actually say, you can be fully believing in God and yet still recognize that everything around you can be falling apart. I mean, look at Joseph, look at
Mhm.
Moses, look at Jesus. I mean,
Yep.
everything around you can be a mess, but God can still be good.
Yep.
They're
And you can
not.
be a mess. You can be broken
Yes,
and God is still good.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Well,
but we've gotten to the point where it's like, if you say God is good, but the stuff around me isn't, or I'm not, that then you don't really believe God. And I'm like, no, that's so not biblical. It's so not
yeah. And
true.
and it's such a modern construct too. And that's something that I've
Yeah.
learned through, writing historicals, is that the period of mourning was so important, and it's for a reason. Like Victorian era, when especially if it was a spouse or something, you'd be in mourning for a year and a half, sometimes 2 years, and it went through varying stages. But you choosing to wear that on the outside told people what to expect when talking to you. So if you are in full black, they knew you're still in deep mourning, even if it's 3 years after the death of a loved one. Whereas if you've shifted to gray, they're going, okay, you're emerging. You're not ready to be back fully into the world yet, but you're emerging. And I miss that we don't have that anymore. We're expected to just show back up at work and be fine and, put on your smiling face and your bright clothes. And it's like, you know what? I think culture lost something when they decided to do away with this visual show. And it's something that most cultures have had forever. And it's just this modern society has been like, no, we're done. And I'm like, I don't think it serves us well to move so quickly from, I lost someone who's a big part of my life to back into the real world.
Yeah. So, wow. But that's a real part of this book. But at the same time, as I'm reading it, I am loving it. It's a book that I wish I could like check out of the rest of my real life for the rest of the day so I could just finish it
Well, I
because
give you permission. I mean, who needs jobs?
no,
Food.
my students won't care if the classes are ready for them on Monday. They
Well, they
love
may
it.
not.
Yeah. But
Extra day off, everybody.
yeah,
Sucks.
exactly. But, when you were researching this book, when you were writing it, what's one of the quirkiest things that you learned?
So one of the silliest things that I had to figure out was how everything worked on the holidays in England at the time. So this is not a Christmas book, but it's set over the Christmas holidays because I needed the kids to be out of school. And that was kind of what started it. So I had to do a bunch of research into, did the trains run on Christmas? Yes, but the offices were closed. So how did you get tickets? Well, you had to buy a flexible ticket that you could redeem anytime in the Christmas week. I was just like, okay. And so then it's like, well, were telegraph offices open? Were the telephones working? No, they just shut it all down on Christmas. And it's like, to us, that makes no sense because it's all automated. But then everything was still run by operators. So it's like, oh, okay. So it was all that I had to learn these granular things like, how did they get a train ticket? So,
My
yeah.
gosh. Yeah, and those are the kinds of details that my husband will be like, "Are you sure you're working?" And I'm like, "Yes, I really am, but there's just all these little details that if I don't get them right, one person's gonna know, and they're
Right,
gonna let me
yeah, and
know."
but can I say how awesome it is to live in this wired world? Because I can literally just look up, what was the weather like on this date in this place, and get a full report, and it's like,
Yeah,
so I know when it snowed in England in these, couple years in question, and
yeah,
it was like, awesome, and happily, it worked out perfectly, so all the weather is accurate, and it helped the plot a lot.
yeah. I did notice when there was snow and it would snow and cover up their footprints and when it
Yep,
caused
yep.
problems and
They totally had a white Christmas that year, all
yeah,
over England.
that's awesome. Very fun. So, when you're writing, what's one of those things that if you could go back and you could tell yourself, because you've written a lot of books now and you've written all different kinds of genres and you're getting ready to write World War II, you've written biblical, you've written a lot kind of in this 1900-ish,
Mhm.
give or take 10 years on either side space. Um, if you were going to go back and tell yourself when you were starting to write, what's a piece of advice you would give yourself?
The thing I would tell myself, because I started writing, primary school, middle school, I wrote my
Yeah.
first book. And so I would just tell myself to be more patient. Like writing and the practice of writing was fantastic, but I was very impatient. Like I wanted to be published by age 16. Didn't happen. But I had this idea that if I don't hit it by these certain marks, then I'm behind or I'm not, where I want to be or where I should be. And that made me rush. And, I was coming of age when self-publishing was first getting started with print on demand technology. So it was literally like the first company announced print on demand. And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Let's do it right now. And why did I do that? It was useless. um I give a lot of advice to young writers, and it's usually to respect the dream. If you want to be a doctor, you can't just be a doctor tomorrow, right? You have to go to school, you have to learn. If you want to be a missionary, you don't just buy a plane ticket and fly to Africa. You have to be trained. And it's the same with writing. You have to learn the craft, you have to learn the industry, you have to learn the trends, you have to learn what the readers want. And that takes time. So give it the time that it needs. And you won't regret it because it's going to make you a better person and it's going to make your writing better too.
So it sounds like you first knew you wanted to be a writer way back when you were in elementary school. Is that right?
Yes, when people asked 6-year-old Rosanna, "What do you wanna be when you grow up?" It was, "I want to be a teacher and write books." And then it was, "I wanna be an archaeologist and write books." And then it was, I don't remember, there was another one in there somewhere, "Be something else and write books." And then eventually I went, "I just wanna write books, that's all. I just wanna write books." So,
Love that. That's so cool that you actually get to do it
I
too.
know.
So, so cool. So, what's your biggest challenge as an author?
Uh, it's balancing all the things because, of course, none of us are just authors, right? Like, we run our own businesses, and I do book cover designs, and my husband and I run a publishing company with 5 imprints, and I'm the one responsible for all the uploading and the file creation and the typesetting and the covers, and so there's all of that. And up until, well, I mean, I'm still a homeschool mom. My oldest is in college now, and my youngest is completely independent. So that's less responsibility than it used to be for me, but it still, takes up time and has historically taken up a lot of time. So just that whole finding a rhythm for each season can be such a challenge because we get into one that works and then the season changes and we're usually a little lagging in catching up
Yeah.
with that and realizing that, okay, maybe this time of day isn't best anymore for my writing, or maybe I need to reorganize the whole schedule a little here and there and give myself this grace and that grace. And yeah, it you just have to be flexible and kind of reevaluate regularly where you are, where your family is, and where writing best fits in.
I think that's so much wisdom and something that I can so relate to because every time it feels like you find, or I find, the really good rhythm, something changes. My job changes, my husband's job changes, how we educated our kids changed, the age of our kids change, the older they are, they want to talk later, whatever. But the seasonality and thinking that it has to change or how I'm going to write stays the same is just ridiculous. Right
Mhm.
now, I write in 20-minute sprints. And so
Wow.
I literally have a 20-minute timer and I'll just turn that on periodically throughout the day because that's how I'm getting my books written.
Yeah.
And that's what's working right now.
And yeah, and you have to do what works. Like, I used to be a 2,000 words a day person, and I
Yeah.
would get that in by a certain hour and carry on with the day. Lately, I've been I call it a writing retreat writer, where I shut off everything else for a week. I will do no other work that week, and I just write a book. So I've been writing a book in 1 week or 2 weeks, and that's how it happens.
I'm
So
gonna call you Karen Kingsbury because I remember when I first heard that that's how she did it, she'd write like 70,000 words in 2 or 3 weeks. I was like, "Oh my word."
yeah, and it sounds intimidating, but it's the only way I can focus enough to get it done with all the other things going on. So, but that's right now. That's not how it
Yeah,
used to work, and it's probably not how it'll work in another year or two, but yeah, where you are right now.
yeah, exactly. Oh, that sounds exhausting. So does writing energize or exhaust you?
Both, depending on the day. Like, when I am in a groove, it just energizes me, and I can't stop thinking about it, and it's so much fun. And then there are other times where it's like pulling teeth to get 10
Yeah,
words out, and it's so hard. And a lot of it is to just knowing when to give yourself grace and knowing, like, your
yeah,
own health and what's going on in your life. I learned last year that I have a tumor on my pituitary gland, which is benign, but it's been probably growing for 15 years. And so it's a slow press on the pituitary. So I didn't really realize until actually my son was diagnosed with type 1 that I had been losing energy and, didn't know what was causing it. So at this point, I'm feeling a whole lot better. I've been on medication for a year, though the tumor is still there. Um, but there's that whole knowing when you have fatigued your system too much,
mhm,
right? Like, for me, the last 2 years, December has just been awful. Like, I pushed and pushed and pushed all year, felt great, and then I crashed in December, both this year and last year. And you just have to kind of realize, okay, well, that's your body telling you something. You've pushed too
yeah.
hard, you've worn out all the glands in the systems, they're fatigued. So take a break. But paying attention to that sort of thing is really important because otherwise you just burn yourself out and that doesn't help.
Yeah. So true. All right, a couple of really quick questions before we wrap up. Sweet or salty snacks?
Both. Yeah, I have
Yeah.
both teeth, both teeth in my mouth.
And tea or coffee?
Coffee.
And how do you celebrate when you're done?
Usually something very exciting like doing the dishes. Woohoo!
I know. I think most of us are terrible at the celebrating piece,
Although ice
but
cream, I do celebrate with ice cream. And on the writing retreats, we always have a goal of 10,000 words a day. So when you hit the goal, you eat the ice cream. So, of course, if you don't hit your goal, then you need a consolation prize like ice cream.
there you go. So ice cream
Ice
either
cream. Ice
way.
cream is celebratory.
So, um, for those who haven't read any of the imposters, you could start with a noble scheme. I really do love the first one too, A Beautiful Disguise. It's so much fun. I would read them in order, but you can start with a noble
Yeah.
scheme and you won't feel like you've missed anything. Roseanna writes like I do, where they're standalones in a series, but it's too much fun. You have to read both of them, truly. But thank you so much for joining me today, Roseanna. It's so much fun to connect with you again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Always so fun to talk books and bookish things and all the
Always,
things.
always.